What's going on, guys, and welcome to today's episode of the Sonic Thing podcast. I am sitting here with my friend Zach. I appreciate you for hopping on the show, my man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So I know you're. So for everybody that's listening, Zach is the CTO over at it's REV Federal Credit Union, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So I appreciate you for coming on, man. So kind of why don't you kick this off and let us a little bit, tell us a little bit more about like your background, how you kind of got to where you're at. I know for some people that might be listening, I mean, achieving the ability to kind of get into like an executive level position in this world, it's a cool accomplishment. So kind of tell us a little bit more like how you got there, like, and then we can kind of kick this off from there.
Yeah. Short version is I went to a non-traditional school. I went to like a tech school basically, and I set a goal for myself 20, well, let's say more than 20 years ago, that I wanted to be a CTO. And that was always a job that really appealed to me. And so I started out as a software engineer. And then I found out pretty quickly that writing code for 8 to 10 hours a day is terrible. And so I didn't want to do that anymore. And got into more of some leadership positions with network management and infrastructure management. That led into a lead developer and technical architect position when I still lived in California. That led to a IT management position. That led to a director position. That led to a VP position in financial services, which is what paved the way for me to become the CTO out here at REV. And so it's one of those things. It's just you have to advance your career I'll say post 2010. You got to be willing to move. You either got to be willing to move companies or you got to be willing to move geographically, because you may get lucky. There's always exceptions, but the years of I've been here and I have been putting in my time, so I'm next on the totem pole to be, the leader when the current leader retires or whatever. Those days are gone. I've been promised a succession position once in my career that didn't come to pass, surprisingly to me. And then I was promised it again when I started at my last job. My boss told me, he literally told me in the interview, he was hiring me as a successor. It was 2 to 3 years away. When I left 5 years later, it was still 2 to 3 years away. So you can't necessarily take what people say at face value, and you got to be willing to go if you want to advance yourself. So that's how I landed where I'm at.
I want to touch base on that question. I mean, sorry, on that statement that you just said. How does one balance like this is kind of like interesting because I come from like a entrepreneurial perspective, right? And like you're coming in from like, within the system kind of aspect, but how does one balance like loyalty with a company and like setting themselves up for success and also making sure I feel like hiring managers might look at a resume and be like, oh, you bounce around too much. Do you think that's like a problem these days, or feel like people maybe overdo it where it's like, oh, if they get paid just an extra buck, they'll leave?
Yeah, what I tell people all the time is that I used to do a lot of speaking at colleges and things like that, and I would tell these students, be like, look, the bottom line is not the bottom line when it comes to your job, when it comes to your career, because there's a whole lot of other things that really matter a lot. But to answer your question about company loyalty, what I would say is any person should operate from a place where the integrity that they have professionally isn't compromised. And what I mean by that is they should be prepared to show the same level of loyalty to the company that the company is prepared to show to them, which may be a lot or it may be very little. But the truth of the matter is that where I came from, there wasn't a whole lot of incentive for my boss to leave because he was getting paid a ridiculously good salary. He had me to run everything and he could focus on other stuff. And so like the idea of him having to actively be involved on the IT side of the world was pretty minimal, to be perfectly honest. When you look at the loyalty that you have to a company, you have to ask yourself, would this company, if it came down to it, would they lay me off or would they keep me, right? And we saw a lot of those true colors come out during COVID.
Sure.
There's a local restaurant here. It's one of the finer steakhouses in the Charleston area, and they kept their staff during COVID, even though the restaurant was shut down. They
Hmm.
paid them anyway. They kept them on. Their whole wait staff is still employed there. They have like zero turnover
Yeah,
because they take
nobody's gonna
care of
want to
people.
leave that. Yeah.
Right? Like, so like what do you want, right? And in 2024, you look at what people work for, what do they value? People value flexibility. People value uh, dollars, right? We have to normalize the idea that people actually go to work for money. Um, and when they do that, it's not, people aren't going to leave for $1 more an hour, usually, right? If they're comfortable where they're at, but people will leave for $5 an hour more. And
Yeah.
and the other part of it too, and this is, I think, kind of more pertinent to your question, is the higher you go in your career, the higher you go up the pyramid, so to speak, the more narrow it gets, which means that, when you're coming in and you're a developer or you're a sysadmin or something like that, there's a lot of jobs probably locally that can give you that level of elevation, right? So you can go from one company where you're a sysadmin, you can go across the street and be a senior sysadmin and make $12,000 more a year or whatever. And you can do that locally. But as you progress in leadership, you get into VP level, you get into C-level roles. Well, those roles are way fewer. So you have to be willing to go to where they are. Otherwise, they're going to find somebody who is. It's just that
Yeah. Yeah.
simple.
So, have you traveled a lot? Do you travel a lot?
I've traveled a lot domestically. I haven't gone a lot internationally. I went to Europe when I was in high school. I've been, I'm a West Coast guy. We talked about that before. So I've definitely spent probably more than a healthy amount of time in Tijuana, and which is not really traveling, but it is technically international.
Sure, sure.
Been to the Caribbean, I've been to Canada, but I haven't been back to Europe or to Asia yet. Those are places on my list.
It's traveling's good. I've been trying to do a lot more of it this year, but life
Yeah.
gets in the way. So as you're like kind of going through the process that you just explained us of like, growing yourself, what was like the number one key component that you worked on internally to make yourself valuable enough so that like when you actually, position yourself and try to go after that CTO role, you were able to successfully land it?
Well, I think people need to divorce themselves from the idea that is prevalent, especially in the tech community, because in the tech community, knowledge is paramount, right? And everybody knows that person. And like, if you're in a tech shop or you're in a development shop, or even if you're like working in a small business and something breaks or something isn't working, everybody knows that wizard person, right? Where they just go and like that person doesn't even have to do anything. They just come stand next to the computer and suddenly it starts working. Everybody has had that experience with tech support. And because of that, it's cultivated this idea that the amount of knowledge you have is the barometer for your success and the merit for which you will be promoted. That is not true. I do not know the most about technology in my organization. I've got a ton of security certifications. I don't know the most about security. What I do know, though, is that while what I do is important, how I do it is way more important, because that's what leaves an impact with people. And at the end of the day, people are what should matter to a leader. The stuff is important, but when you're in a leadership role, it's really all about the people you lead. So like, I'm the chief technology officer here at REV, and I spend probably 20% of my time doing technical stuff and probably 80% of my time talking about people and culture, because it's that
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
And so what people have to do, I think, is, or at least what I did, is I started recognizing, and it took me a good probably 12, 15 years of working through organizations and having some fairly significant faux pas, honestly, about dealing with people for me to actually figure this out. Then what I did is I started getting good at really specific things. I started getting good at public speaking. because if you can work a room, you can like totally control the tone, the tenor, the mood, the atmosphere. Like you can totally do that if you're a good public speaker. And then if you're a good public speaker, you go in for these executive interviews, and it's usually the firing squad type of interview, right? Where there's 5 or 6 other executives around the table. They're all shooting questions at you, and you're trying to come up on your feet with like, here's all the answers to these questions. But if you're a good public speaker, you can do that really eloquently. And that makes a very, very strong impact on people, right? Do you have to look back at your slide deck for the presentation they probably had you do? Or do you have it down so cold that you can just memorize it and go, right? Do you have a cadence that gives them the ability to ask questions, but also alludes to your complete confidence in the subject matter? And then it's just really becoming more diversified in how you lead, right? I have a bunch of different areas, but one of the things that is going to be required, I think, more so of executives in the future, even than it is now, and it's kind of commonplace, but the ability to lead areas that are outside of your discipline, right? So, like for example, one of the areas that I'm in charge of is the project management office. Now, I am not a project manager. I know very little about project management, but I'm responsible for leading that division of the company, right? And so you gotta learn how to develop a management style and a management acumen that is applicable outside the area in which you have a lot of experience or expertise.
It's so interesting to me because somebody might think like, oh, if I want to become a CTO, I better know my technology so well. I gotta get technical and become the best at doing all the technicalities. And your answer had nothing to do with that.
No, it really doesn't. Yeah, I learned this the hard way because so going back to when I was in Portland, right? I worked for a company called Leupold and Stevens. It's not a law firm. It's actually a rifle scope manufacturer. They work in the firearms industry.
Hmm.
And the VP of sales there, so that's basically as high as you can go other than being the CEO at that company is a VP. And he was the VP of sales. This guy could not have been less technical if he tried. And he was a US Army colonel. So you can believe whatever you want about the Army, but I guarantee their officers know how to lead. That's
For
one of
sure.
the things they do really well. And so this dude's a colonel in the Army, and he ends up leaving the company to become the CTO at a large manufacturing company across town.
No way.
And I was looking at it and I was like, how in the world is he the CTO? And it like light bulb moment, it was like, oh, it's not a technical position. There's a technical component and there's a technical acumen that's required, but it's not a technical position. It's a business position. It's a leadership position. And what people really want to know, especially CEOs who are putting people in the role that I'm in now, is can you effectively lead people? Can you translate the vision, not just the vision of technology or the technology roadmap, but can you actually translate that into a business strategy that lays into the overall vision and direction of the company? That's the skill set.
For sure. No, I appreciate that insight. So speaking of now, security, can you kind of share with us from like a high level what you see in the cybersecurity landscape and like how you see it shifting with new technology emerging like AI, other things like
Mhm.
that, and then just like major challenges that organizations are facing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge that organizations are facing is still the same one they've been facing for 10 years, which is a shortage of people. Security is complicated, and it is very difficult to find good people. And kind of getting to what we were talking about a minute ago, it's really really hard to retain good people, because my staffing strategy has always been really simple. It's 4 words: smart people have options, and
I like that. Yeah.
they do.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and there are security certs for the most part are not just paper, right? It's not the old school MCSE where it's like everybody has one, right? Or something like that. These are like, you get a CISSP, you get a CASP, like those certs are not easy to get, right? They're hard for a reason. And there's a pedigree that comes with that. And those folks that have those things have options. So that to me is the biggest challenge. From a technical perspective, I'm really interested, not necessarily, I mean, I'm interested in all those technologies kind of to a point, but where my head goes is when you start getting the confluence of those technologies coming together. So you think about something like AI, right? AI in and of itself, as far as security goes, we've actually been leveraging it for a while. Like there's a lot of behavioral analytics platforms that are out there. They have machine learning behind them. They have a ton of compute in the cloud. That's what they all do. They go analyze patterns and they predict behavior. That's kind of step one, right, of the AI and security. Where I think it's going to be really interesting, though, is when you start taking these other emerging technologies. I mean, blockchain may not be emerging anymore, but it kind of is, right? And you start laying AI down on top of blockchain and integrating those two things. Or you get even scarier and you start saying, well, what if quantum computing actually becomes a real thing? And suddenly it's got AI behind it too, because Google's actually working on this currently as we speak. They have a giant quantum computer and they have a huge AI engine, and they're trying to figure out how to put the two things together. And I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but imagine a world where the concept of passwords is gone, not just obsolete, but literally gone, because every possibility can be guessed in a nanosecond.
Instantaneous. Yeah.
Right. So it's just a different mindset around security from that perspective. And I think the confluence of those technologies, especially with the emerging of AI, and honestly, the lack of regulation around any of it, is very, very concerning to me. And I think that's where we're going to start seeing things going. I currently, being in financial services, I currently have the privilege of having our annual exam going on right now. So I have a bunch of federal government employees from the NCUA here doing an examination of our credit union. And it is, I think, a very necessary thing to have that regulatory oversight. And they don't know how to handle some of the emerging technologies either. So when you think about AI in a practical sense for business, there's probably not going to be a whole lot that is telling you what you can and can't do. And honestly, I've got one kid going to college and one kid about to go to college. The colleges are freaking out about it too, because they're not freaking out about it from a security perspective. They're freaking about it from plagiarism.
Yeah.
They think that, the educational value is going to be diminished because you can ask ChatGPT to write you a 10-page paper in 5 seconds, right? It's a totally different mindset that you have to think about. But I think it really does come back to people. AI, I spent a lot of time talking about AI. I spent a lot of time studying it, doing some development against it, with various APIs and things of that nature. AI is not a replacement for a human capital. In fact, I would argue that AI actually requires human capital to function, because somebody's got to manage the thing. And I think the use of AI improperly actually presents a lot more risk to companies, both from a cybersecurity and a financial perspective.
So how does a company stay, I guess, vigilant of where this technology is going and make sure they're set up properly so that, nothing bad happens?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first thing you got to do is you got to have a good program, right? We're seeing it already, right? 10 years ago, the idea of a chief information security officer position was something reserved for the Fortune 10, right? Like it was a very specialized, very expensive position that was really more geared toward large enterprise. Now we're starting to see that position be everywhere. You either have a chief information security officer or just an information security officer. You have someone in just about every company who's responsible for security, and you got to have a good program, because nothing is going to happen unless you have policies that management people like me actually go and support. That is absolutely number one, because if you don't have that, and if the CEO or the CTO believe that the policy applies to everybody but them, then you don't have security. Then you have a breach, and it's waiting to happen. And we've seen it 100 different times where a CEO got an email and clicked on something, and all of a sudden it was breached because they didn't have the same controls on their mobile device that they required everybody else to have.
So you're very
All the things.
proponent on like zero trust policies, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of zero trust. I love the theory of zero trust. I'm not sure that the practical implementation of zero trust always works. I think it does at a certain level, but there are a lot of things that are proprietary. So, like for example, we have a core banking system that is built for that purpose by a specific software vendor. It requires a certain type of connection to it. That's not something that we can just say we're going to not trust, right? We're going to have to do a whole bunch of inspection on that connection, because if we do that, it will actually break. So the vendors have to support it. It's an evolving landscape. And security has really always been an arms race, right? It's, the bad guys do something, and then the good guys figure out how to stop it, and then the bad guys do something new. It's basically, electronic detente. But I think really when it comes down to what companies need, they've got to have a good program, and they've really got to have good partners in their vendor ecosystem, whoever that is. If that's an MSP, if that's a VAR, if that's somebody who just does professional services for them, they've got to have someone who can actually do the stuff, and they got to have people who are confident in what the ecosystem actually looks like. Because the reality of most IT departments is they're doing a million different things with a million different priorities, and we all know that if everything's important, nothing is. So they don't really focus on the security landscape. They focus on patching. Patching's good. It's really important to do that, but patching is not security. Patching is a component of your security program, but that doesn't mean you're secure. And so they've got to have people around them who know the ecosystem, who are in this all the time, who look at it, who report on it, who give them tips and say, hey, you're actually really vulnerable to this thing. You need to go patch it right now. This is the criticality, and be able to communicate that, as my old boss would say, in English, so that people can understand it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So I guess this is a good time for this question. How do you approach the balance between like security measures and like user convenience or productivity within an organization?
Well, I think acceptance goes a long way. What we've seen as a trend in the industry is what I call the consumerization of IT, right? Because there are still some people that want to carry two phones. Having been a person who carried two phones, I don't ever want to carry two phones again. It's annoying, and I don't want to have. So I want to have my work profile and my personal profile on the same device. It's convenient. So you have to build things that can control that, and thus the MDM industry was born, right? It's, I think, very important to just understand that for the most part, people are going to do what is convenient for them, right? It's one of my colleagues says it's the number one way to piss off Americans is to take their convenience away. Like, as soon as you do that, it's war. It's like war zone, right? And it doesn't matter what it is. Like it could be that you're like shutting down a lane on the freeway to do work, or like to, in the case of like Caltrans, pretend you're going to work, but it's you take convenience away from Americans, and it's like a nightmare scenario. Like it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them. So I think you have to bridge that with a reasonable degree of security and bake it into some of the existing features. And so, like, I'll use mobile devices, for example, right? Mobile devices, if you want to have your Teams or your Slack channel on your mobile devices, or that app on your mobile device, well, there's built-in two-factor authentication using the facial recognition features native to an iPhone or an Android device. So use those, right? There's domain credentials that you can enforce with password complexities or PIN codes, right? You can do one-time phrases. There's a lot of ways to do it, but you gotta have an understanding of who that is. And where I think that comes from, honestly, I think that comes from management, because you can say all those things, but if management doesn't support it, then none of it's gonna matter. Nobody's gonna care. No, everybody's going to do what they want anyway. So you got to have, that's where it comes back to the program, the policy, the management support, all that has to be there.
For sure, for sure. Okay. So my final question for you is, like, what advice? I know we kind of started the whole episode like this, but going back to it, like, what other advice would you give to like aspiring IT or cybersecurity professionals, like looking to make an impact? I know, and I only ask this because it's one of those industries where it's like you kind of do all the work, and if you're doing a good job, nothing bad happens, so nobody really cares about your
Yeah.
work, you know? So like I feel like some people
Well,
might feel like can't really have like an actual impact. Like, so how does somebody in this field kind of create something significant for themselves?
well, I think a couple things, yeah, to shoot off of what you said there a second ago. I have been doing this type of work a really long time, and nobody has ever called me just to tell me something's working. So that's never happened.
uh,
But I mean, I think it comes back to, I talk about it here with my team all the time. It's part of what we call REV DNA. I have 4 criteria of characteristics that I look for when I hire people, because education and experience are important, but they're definitely not the measuring stick. Um, and it's really simple. It's integrity, it's passion, it's ambition, and it's humility. And that's sort of my 4-leaf clover of a person if I'm looking for an employee. Because if you have integrity, then I can trust you. And if you don't have integrity, then you can't work for me, because the stuff we deal with is too sensitive, it's too important. And frankly, there's just too much risk to employ people that you don't trust.
mhm.
Um, and I would define integrity as who you are is what you do when no one's looking, right? And so if we can trust you when no one's looking, you have formed a baseline, because nothing happens without trust anyway. Passion, I think, is incredibly important, because I think in this industry, people get burned out a lot, and we're looking for people who would do this kind of stuff anyway, even if it wasn't their job. So, like, are you a tinkerer? Do you have that eternal curiosity? Do you have the desire to be to really pursue something and become an expert at it, right? There's a passion for doing this type of work that just some people just have, right? It's a terrible thing to just have a job. It's way better to have something that you totally love doing, right? A lot of people have said if you find something you love, you never work a day in your life. That's kind of true, but kind of not true, because there are grind days in IT that are just awful. System goes down and you're here at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday because something's broken, and you have to be back at your desk at 8 o'clock to make sure the whole business is still working. Those are brutal days. But if you have a passion for it, it will become less of a grind, because you really genuinely like what you do. Ambition, I think, is kind of, I use the term to mean more of like not necessarily climbing a ladder, because honestly, not everybody is cut out for a leadership position. Not everybody should pursue one. People should understand what they're actually looking for in their career. And I like leadership. It's what I like to do. I have never felt more gratified in my job than what I do right now. But it's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Some people, you mentioned the idea of moving into management and they freak out because it scares the hell out of them.
Too much responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's, I think very ambition is being committed to being better tomorrow than you were today. To drive, right? You know, that's more what it is. And then humility is the fourth one. And the reason for that is because with as much knowledge as people in this industry have, with the relatively high IQ that people have in this industry, you get a lot of people who are technical experts at things. And generally speaking, you can't teach an expert anything. But you can teach a humble person anything.
for sure.
And that's, I think, that's the kind of the underlying special sauce, if you will, to really find somebody who's going to make a significant impact. And then as it comes down to trying to make an impact, honestly, in my career, it hasn't been about trying to make an impact. It's being that person with those four characteristics, and opportunities just come because people know that you're reliable. And then when you're reliable, you find yourself doing things under a spotlight and you get highlighted, right? And you have a passion, so you want to do it excellently. You don't want to just mail it in. And you have ambition, so you want to make sure that the team is successful and the company is successful. But you're also not in there seeking the limelight, right? We have a saying at REV when we hire people is that we don't hire brilliant jerks. And there's a reason for that, right? We want people who are hungry. We want people who are smart. We want people who are humble, but we really don't want people who know it all and need to make sure everybody else knows they know it all.
For sure.
That's not a great fit. But those opportunities, when you're that person, those opportunities come. And honestly, I've had plenty of people over the course of my career that have either been people I've mentored or people that I've learned from, I've seen it happen. I mean, I have a VP here now who I hired from my last company who never would have gotten to the level she was at if she had stayed where she was. But she was willing to be excellent at something. And also, by the way, that's how you create a lot of job satisfaction, is give people an opportunity to be excellent at something. Because I've never met anybody who's excellent at something they hate.
That is true. That is true.
You know, and maybe that person does exist out there, but I've never met them. And so, like, from my perspective in business, give people an opportunity to be excellent. You're going to create a lot of job satisfaction. They're going to want to do more. They're going to want to grow. They're going to step into things. They're going to take risks. At some point, and this is the hard part as a leader, they're going to leave.
Yeah. Yes. I tell my team members all the time. I tell them, listen, like, this is actually part of my, like, when we onboard new team members, I go, the way we work here is I will always work. We have our like 90-day reviews. I'll be checking up on you, making sure you're good. And in those moments, if I ever feel like your destiny is somewhere else, I'm going to be that guy, that boss that's going to actually recommend for you to leave and go figure that out. And I always get like weird reactions because they're like, "What? You want us to like quit?" And I'm like, "No. My point is like, I know like I'm a man of God, so like I'm a very firm believer that like, I'll be taken care of if I take care of others,
Yeah.
you know." So, plus at the end of the day, if you're forcing someone to do something they don't want to do, that's just friction that's going to end nothing with nothing good.
That's basic human psychology says that the easiest way to get somebody to hate something is to tell them they're required to do it. Right. And I don't care what that is, right? Like, I could tell you,
take out the trash.
You have to go lay on this beach and drink Mai Tais for the next 40 days. And that's all you can do. And by like day 6, you're going to be like, this sucks.
Yeah,
this
bored
beach
out of
is
your
sandy and these drinks are watered down and it's awful. Like that's that's just how humans work. I don't know why we're wired that way, but we just
It's
are. So,
it's so
uh,
funny. Yeah, I love though as like a leader, it's important to understand those perspectives in people and kind of work with them. So that's really cool, Zach. I really appreciate you for hopping on the podcast here today.
hey man.
Where can people find you if somebody wants to like
So
you or
I'm on LinkedIn. It's just Zac Streelman on LinkedIn. I work at REV. It's a great gig. Look forward to connections. Happy to make them, and look forward to talking to you guys again. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Sounds good, Zach. Yeah, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, please remember to leave a like and subscribe for more content, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. All right. Peace.